entitled Passing the Baton. You see, we as a church have had the baton passed from one leader to the next. And how we pass the baton is crucial to winning the race. We're going to talk about change and transition and how that's a necessary part of passing the baton. How many of you here are sports fans? Football fans? Raise your hand high. Now, I know that all of you who raised your hands agree with me that the Dallas Cowboys are the all-time greatest team in the league. Okay, I'm just meddling. I should have asked somebody to keep the car running for me because I knew I was up here in Brandon territory. But how many of you know a little something about relay races? Good, because I believe the Christian race is like a relay race. Therefore, the subject I want to address today is passing the baton. In the world of sports, passing the baton means the act of one runner in a relay race carefully handing off a metal or bamboo tube to another runner waiting just up the track in front of them. That waiting member of the relay team cannot begin their portion of the race until they receive the baton from the runner coming up from behind. Not only must the baton be passed from one runner to the next, it must be passed within the allotted space called the exchange zone, and it must not be dropped. If either infraction occurs, the entire team is disqualified. In short, the success or failure of the team is not necessarily dependent on how fast they are, but how well the baton is passed. See, passing the baton is so vital to winning the race that hour upon hours are spent practicing the number of strides needed to complete the exchange in the required distance, how the receiving runner's hand should be positioned just so when the baton is passed, and how the approaching runner should place the baton in that hand. You see, in a relay race, the runners run as a team working together to hand off the baton in order to win the race. It's not a relay if the lead runner encourages everybody to get on the track, but carries the baton along. It's not a relay if the team spends all of its time talking about passing the baton, but never gets on the track to run the relay itself. It's not a relay if the lead runner allows the runners to touch the baton, but not actually carry it to own their and to complete their portion of the race. Winning the race is the goal, and passing the baton is the single most vital key. Therefore, we need to recognize the importance of change and transition. In Joshua 1, verses 1 and 2, the word says, "After the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant. He said, 'Moses, my servant, is dead.'" Now, the book of Joshua deals with one very important stage in the fulfillment of God's great plan, and that's to provide salvation to the world. The people of Israel had to be settled in the promised land to prepare for the coming of Joshua, Jesus Christ, who would live and die as Savior, not only for Israel, but for the whole human race. In 1351 BC, the nation of Israel was about to embark on the greatest race of its life. See, God was trying to take them someplace, to the promised land. God wanted them to deal with change and transition, so the baton was passed from Moses to Joshua. You see, trying to run a race in and of itself has its own pressures, but add to that the death of a coach. Not only are you a ship that has suddenly lost its captain, but you feel like a boat that's lost its rudder. And that's exactly what happened to me in high school, just before I started track meet. Our track coach, Miss Johnson, had a heart attack, and died just weeks before our biggest and most important meet. We were in the days when our assistant coach took over. For you see, the moment that our coach died, the moment we knew the event of her death occurred, we experienced change. And it was the ending of our relationship with Coach Johnson that our transition began. You see, transition begins by letting go of something. It's the mental and emotional transformation that we need to experience in order to let go of our old arrangement of being so we can be open to embrace new things. Now, we cried a lot when we lost our coach, and we lost some of our pizzazz, some of our resolve. We thought about how Coach Johnson had been there for us. She was an advocate for us and an encourager. We knew that she believed in us and that she helped us believe in ourselves. But now that she was gone and the change and transition had begun, we questioned, what would we lose as a result of this change? How would we proceed? Well, we had to become a new leadership, realizing that old hierarchies may need to be disassembled if new structures are to be built, and to examine how we might need to change in order to meet the challenges of times to come. Reflecting on this allowed me to relate to the people of Israel as they mourned for Moses on the plain of Moab. See, Moses led the people out of Egypt through the wilderness for 40 years and to the Jordan River. God allowed him to see the promised land, but he told Moses that he would die and not cross over. See, God knew the anxiety would rise among the people and motivation would fall, so God tended to their hearts. And with divine wisdom, God limited their grieving to 30 days, and then it was time to move on. Now, this was a time granted to acknowledge their losses openly and sympathetically. And as human beings, I'm sure that they experienced loss uniquely, just like you and I. They grieved in the midst of change and transition, and they dealt with denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. See, denial helps us survive the loss. And during denial, we ask questions like, why did they have to leave? Why couldn't they stay with us always? And then we wonder, how do we go on? Denial helps us pace our feelings of grief, letting in only as much as we can handle. And as we begin to accept the reality of our loss, we unknowingly begin the healing process. Anger is also a necessary part of transition connected with grief. The more you truly feel it, the more it will begin to dissipate and the more you will heal. But anger has no limits. And if we're not aware, during this time, we can extend anger to friends, our church family, the ones who left, and even to God. Underneath, however, anger is pain. And it's natural that one might begin to feel deserted and abandoned. But anger is just another indication of the intensity of the love that you have for the one you lost. Bargaining is another part of grieving and transition. We become lost in a maze of if-onlys or what-if statements. Our attention moves squarely to the present, and we want life to return to what it was when the one we loved was with us. We may even express depression, which is natural. The realization that a loved one is not coming back is understandably depressing. However, at some point on the journey, we must find our way to acceptance. Now, the reality that our loved one is gone reminds us that life has forever been changed, and we have to readjust. We must learn to reorganize roles, to reassign them to others, or take them on ourselves. See, we can never replace what's been lost, but we can make new connections, new meaningful relationships, new interdependencies as we move, change, grow, and evolve. So the nation of Israel had to make a choice. They had to choose to be over here in the wilderness or over there in the promised land. I don't know about you today. Given the opportunity, I want to move on and receive what God has for me. And just like my old relay team, we had to recognize that God had more visioning for us to do. God wanted us to grow beyond where we presently were. there was a race for us to win. And as a part of recognizing we're in change and transition to facilitate the healing of our team, we spent time reflecting and honoring the memory of Coach Johnson. Likewise, God gave the children 30 days of reflection. You see, Moses was not a perfect man, but he was a great servant of God. Moshe, who was born a Hebrew but raised an Egyptian by an Egyptian princess. Moses, who heard the voice of the Lord from a bush on fire. Moses, who was the voice of God to Pharaoh during the 10 plagues and the person to lead the people through the Red Sea. Moses, the Lord's instrument in providing water and food for millions in the wilderness, who received and shared the 10 Commandments and the law. It is to this same Moses we attribute the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures. Yes, it was that great leader Moses who led the people up to the Promised Land, all the way to the east end of the Jordan River. But the baton had been passed to Joshua, and God gave him the honor of leading the Israelites into the land west of the Jordan, the land promised to Abraham, home of the Canaanite, Hittites, Amorite, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Passing the baton in the midst of change and transition is not easy. It wasn't easy for Moses, and it wasn't easy for Joshua. But all we need to know is that when God sets the program and the agenda, you can bet the victory will follow no matter how things look. You see, the relay race is a clear representation of how the church must work and what happens when it doesn't. As those athletes move into position during the 2012 London Olympics, in my mind, I was seeing the church lined up in lanes all over the globe, batons in hand, running the race that matters most in this world, the divine relay. The divine relay, you see, is filled with exchange zones. It is, if the baton of faith passes fluidly from person to person, from generation to generation, then we speed unstoppably toward the finish line. But if the exchange is fumbled, the whole team, the whole church suffers. The divine relay is tough, y'all. The track is treacherous. There's so many ways to mangle the exchange zones, to overshoot, to be knocked off the track, to drop the baton, to stop running. But the church needs champion runners who never give up, who persevere no matter what they encounter, who run to win, unstoppable no matter what the cost. And to do this, we need collaboration. Each runner doing their personal best, running in sync, reaching, receiving, releasing, and pressing on with every ounce of strength that they have to give. And when the ultimate anchor runner, Jesus, crosses the finish line, we can know we will run the race. For you see, he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. Surely he ran the race with us, and we know that he finished it. For they hung him high, and they stretched him wide. He bowed his head, and then he died. And yet while he was in the grave, God was preparing him a new name, a name above every name. That final race, I heard tell, was early on a Sunday morning. God called out to the anchor runner, Jesus. And because he rose from the dead with all power in his hand, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. Not only does he carry the baton, but the entire team across God's finished heavenly line. God bless as we move forward into change and transition. Stay tuned next week, same time, same place, to discover what